Gaurav, you can start the session.
Thanks, Indrani. A warm welcome to everyone to the fourth edition of our Catalyzing Change Conversation series. My name is Gaurav Shah. I'm one of the co-founders of the Indian School of Development Management, ISDM. Would like to start with maybe a quick introduction to Catalyst 2030 and the idea of a catalyzing change conversation before I hand it over to Shashank to take it ahead. So Catalyst 2030 is a group of or a network of social entrepreneurs and social enterprises which has come together to make the SDGs happen. And I think the realization is fairly strong amongst all of us on this call that we cannot make this happen on our own. No single individual, organization, or even sector can take that responsibility of saying, hey, I will make this happen. And therefore, the importance of collaboration, collaborative working, of understanding people, of empathizing with them, and figuring out ways of partnering towards the achievement of the SDGs has become more and more important. With that in mind, I think one of the things that Catalyst 2030 and ISDM are trying to do is to bring more and more people from across Sarkar, Samaj, and Bazaar onto a common platform for conversations. With a clear belief that more conversations of this kind will help bring more clarity. More conversations of this kind will help probably develop a better sense of an understanding of the other and respect for the other. And these are all fundamental building blocks for collaborations and partnerships. So warm welcome to this really critical session on closing the core cost funding gap. Our partner for the day is Bridgespan, the Bridgespan India Group, and we have Shashank from Bridgespan here who will be moderating the discussion. Bridgespan has very kindly agreed to actually bring this entire very critical topic together, and it kind of builds on the work that they've been doing through their Pay What It Takes initiative. So welcome Rahul from Sattva, Nikita from Masoom, Atul from It'll Give, and I hand it over to Shashank.
Thanks, Gaurav, and warm welcome to all the participants. Thank you for making time for this. Just a brief introduction to our panelists. We are very lucky to have panelists who have first-hand experience of the problem from different stakeholders' side. So we have Nikita from Masoom. She's the CEO and co-founder of Masoom. Masoom works in Pune, Mumbai, and Nagpur. And the flagship program is the night school program that they run. They are currently having more than 89 night schools running in these three cities. We also have Atul. Atul is the Chief Operating Officer of It'll Give and the man making the Grow Fund happen. So he has been working closely with more than 100 NGOs as part of the Grow Fund initiative to support their core cost and organizational development through grant making. Finally, we have Rahul from Sattva. He's an associate principal in Sattva and leads the nonprofit advisory practice in Sattva. Welcome all. And to start, I think it's important to define what we are calling core cost. So if you could go to the presentation that we have. Rupali?
Yes, just coming up.
Yeah. So there's a reason why we are calling it core cost. There are other names to it. It's called overheads. It's called administrative cost. It's called non-program cost. It's called indirect cost. And it misses the point. All the other nomenclature miss the point. And that's the reason why we are looking forward to make it sound what it actually is. It's not indirect. Without it, you can't really have costs which will create impact. It's not overhead. It's foundational. So basically, rather than using accounting terms, we believe that we need to move towards using terms which are more impact focused. And we believe that the kind of cost heads that we are going to talk about today, they're very foundational, they're very core to the impact objective that all the stakeholders really are trying to pursue. Rupali, can we have this in the screenshot, the slideshow? Okay, thank you. So if we move to the next slide, hello, Rupali?
Hello. Yeah, just a second.
I'm really sorry. So basically, if you look at any cost that an organization is incurring, there can be costs which cannot be attributable to a specific program or a project. There will be costs which can be attributed to multiple programs or can be shared between program and the core team. And there are some direct costs that you can attribute to programs. So people on the field working, let's take it as example, the people who are only focusing on supporting the community in one night school are a direct cost for that night school. There would be some people whose role is only to support those programs, or there may be certain office premises which are shared between the program and the core team, which will be partly with the program and partly with the core cost. And finally, there are other costs that we incur. So let's say if it's a large organization, it has a separate head office, then the cost that we may be incurring in terms of their electricity, consumables, fundraising team, because the fundraising team may not be just working for one project, they can be defined as the core cost of the NGO. At this juncture, I just wanted to stop and share a poll with all of you. And one point that I wanted to make here was there's no guideline on how to allocate core costs. It comes under costing policies of an organization. We had worked with KPMG in 2019, 2020 and analyzed cost structures of 40 NGOs. And there for standardization, we had used a thumb rule of saying, if any resource that the organization is using, if 10% of that resource is being used by a program, the cost can be allocated to that program. There's an element of materiality here. So you'll not allocate 10% of 500 rupees to a program. But if you're incurring 10 lakh rupees and 10% of that resource is going into a particular program, you would probably allocate 10% of that resource cost as a direct cost to that program. That was a rule that KPMG and us had set when we were analyzing the 40 NGOs. So would request all of you to just quickly, based on your experience, share which one of these costs may be classified as core cost. Maybe we should give this question another 30 seconds and then we should move.
All right, we'll close in the poll in 10 seconds. So please select your answers.
Interesting. Because, like, for example, electricity for training center for women. If the organization is focused on creating programs which is conducting training for women, all the costs related to running those programs in a training center should be considered a program cost. It should not be considered a core cost as per our understanding and KPMG's guidance to us. Program manager salaries, again, unless and until there's a part of program manager's job description which is not directly about the program, it should be a core cost as well. Finance manager, again, this was the trick question that we had, where depending on how much of finance manager's work is related to one specific program, if she's only handling transactions for a program, from an accounting principles perspective, it can be argued that finance manager's salary should be included in the core in the program cost and not the core cost as well. Finally, coming to hiring an HR personnel, it can be an OD, an organization development. So the HR personnel's cost could be a core cost. But if you're paying a consultant to hire a person, unless and until it's a like program specific hiring, it should be considered as a organization development investment or a cost related to organization development. Again, finance manager, as I said, it can be trick. It can be purely a core cost as well. Moving to the next one, and I think, Rupali, we should just give 30 seconds to get the first choice answer rather than a thoughtful answer on that. Like instinctive answer is what we're looking for the next poll.
Sure.
So the question that we are asking, and especially for the NGOs, what do you feel is the most common funding policy when it comes to covering the core cost, or as they're called, indirect cost or admin cost, overheads, non-program cost, and other terms? So, and just 30 seconds to get a sense. So whichever one you feel is what your guts are telling you, please just check that mark. Rupali, we should close the poll, and can you show the results? So this is more in terms of what we were expecting, with a majority saying fixed core cost rates between 5 to 15%. Would love to know who are the 16 people who believe that core cost rates exceed 25%, and like if they can share more in the chat as well. I think that's all the other audience could also benefit from this. And how many of those 16 are funders? Because I think one of our research finding was that the funders' perception and the NGO's perception when it comes to core cost is very different. I'll just quickly walk you through some of the key findings related to core cost that we have identified through 2 years of research in PWIT initiative. So first thing that we learned through our research, through this analysis of 40 NGOs, was that there is no one indirect cost or core cost rate that can suffice for everyone. It varies very significantly. When we standardized the way core cost was getting computed, it varied from 5 to 51%. And it was definitely different for advocacy or research organizations, think tanks, versus direct service delivery organizations. This core cost rate depends on what's the operating archetype, as I said, but also what's the organization structure, what's the operating model, and what's the context in which the NGO is operating. We also found that 70% of these 40 NGOs faced a deficit when it came to core cost coverage from program funders. For these 28 odd NGOs, the core cost rate came out to be 22%, and the weighted average core cost allocation from program funders was only 13%. So there was a significant gap that was existing between the actual core cost incurred by the organization and what was being paid for by the funders. Moving to the next slide. As I was saying, there's a very clear dissonance when it comes to what the funders perceive and what the NGOs are saying. In our research, 83% of NGOs said ensuring coverage of core cost is a challenge. 23% of funders believe that NGOs share accurate cost structures, which means 77% of funders say that NGOs don't understand what their cost structures are. They're not able to share what their accurate core costs are. And hence, the funders believe that they are resorting to a specific or standard rate in absence of that transparency that can come if the NGOs are able to accurately compute their cost structures and share those with the funders. We are not sharing that in this slide, but we also found examples where when the NGOs were willing to share more transparently about their cost structures or costing policies, the funders did work together and helped NGOs to get their right coverage. Moving to the next slide. What the implications of this are very significant. What happens for NGOs is if you're not getting core cost coverage, you end up using flexible funding, unrestricted funding to cover your operating cost, which means you'll not have any operating surplus. 49% of NGOs that we had surveyed, and this was a survey for around 400 NGOs, had never had an operating surplus in a 3-year period. They have limited resources to invest in organization development. They're not able to innovate. They're not able to invest in growth of the organization. Only 18% of NGOs said that they are able to invest sufficiently in organizational development. And there is no cover against external risk to fundings. So if there's an external shock, the way we saw during COVID, or if one of the key funders moves out of funding NGOs, then the NGO programs are at a risk. So 53% of nonprofits had less than 3 months of reserves in September 2020. Before COVID, this number was 38%. So COVID created more stress on the NGOs. One specific thing I wanted to point out was our research also revealed that NGOs led by Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi leaders were facing harsher challenges than those not being led by Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi leaders. So 70% of DBA leaders-led NGOs never had an operating surplus in the period, compared to 45% of non-DBA led. So there's a very key requirement for us as sector stakeholders to reflect back if our policies, our approach of funding is leading to like some kind of marginalization. So Uttara, just to directly answer your question, we did look at that axis of marginalization. Our data did not show significant variance between women-led organizations or organizations which were not led by women. But at the same time, I want to point out that our question was more in terms of, does the leadership team have representation from these groups? We were not talking about the CEO or the executive director. We were talking about the leadership team. So that's the caveat that I'll make. But in general, we need to understand that if we are not covering core costs for NGOs, we are harming the social impact that we all aspire to achieve, and we are perpetuating inequity in India. With this, I would want to move on to our panel discussion. And Nikita, I wanted to bring you in first. You heard our conversation more about how the sector faces and what are the kind of costs that we see as core costs. But from Masoom's perspective, it will be good to know what kind of cost heads are core costs for you, which are foundational, but also costs that you face challenges in getting funding for.
Yeah, thanks, Shashank. With Masoom, basically, I'll just list out the core costs and then I'll list out where the challenges are. So the core cost is primarily the rent of the office, the fixed furnitures and fixtures. So the furniture that we have here and other fixtures, office insurance, some of the back office teams salaries, like we mentioned, fundraising person salary, AMCs, annual maintenance costs, repairs and maintenance, and of course, so because we work with so many schools, we have a lot of educational material, and sometimes we need extra space. And the office premises is not sufficient, so we need places like go down sometimes, and then we don't have rent to pay for the go down which we would like to rent. Then sometimes we want to hire consultants and pay them for the recruitment, but then that's a limiting thing. So insurance, office insurance, courier, stationery, internet in the office. Office renovation again. So most challenging has been rent and renovation. Although over the years we split it up because we realized initially all the rent and all the back office salaries, including admin, finance, HR, would all be 100% into the core. But then we realized we were educated and then we started splitting it. So we managed to split the admin, finance, to a certain extent, HR 50% to core and 50% to program, but still it was not sufficient because we realized that other 50% itself is not making that 5% of which most of the donors insist. Then the extra one, we have good donors who we have Grow Fund now, and we have some donors doing gap funding for us through which we are able to raise. So I think these are the main challenges. Sometimes electricity also, the bill.
And what are the kind of challenges do funders state when they say, okay, we can't fund you on these costs?
So mostly it is the internal policy. So we have a policy, we have this cap beyond which we cannot go is what is the thing, and which is we have to accept because then it is their internal policy. In some cases, they would come back and point out some budget line items. Like for instance, corpus, or sometimes some of the furnitures and fixtures, like if we've asked for too many laptops or something like that, which has been a part of it, and they feel that it's not a part of their some specific line items. But mainly it is the internal policies, the investment committee that has set the limits for themselves and for funding the core costs.
And sorry, just one follow-up question, Nikita. Are these policies so hard set, or are you able to convince funders when you discuss your budgets with them?
Fortunately for us, we have been able to negotiate to the extent that, okay, if we need to, it's very difficult to negotiate some of the line items, like I said, rent, office renovation, go down spaces, those kind of laptops for the office, those kind of things, extra people if you need suddenly, if there is a mid-term assessment that has been done by an external agency and there is a need for, say, people, say for in my case, second line, we needed 3-4 directors, and till the group and came, we didn't have the capacity. So those are the spaces where I think it becomes challenge.
Sure. Thanks, Nikita. So basically what I heard you say is typically the funder side response is it's the policy, or this is what the investment committee has decided. And that's what leads to inflexibility on the core cost. And the other thing is when you have conversation on certain cost heads, they are able to accommodate, but there are other cost heads on which they are very inflexible.
Yes.
So, and I think at this point, Atul, I wanted to bring you in and talk about your Grow Fund experience in terms of you are one of the more evolved funders, but when you look at it from the perspective of NGOs, are there challenges that you see in NGOs being able to compute and communicate their core cost to the funders? Are there things that you see that NGOs are creating a barrier for this core cost funding to happen?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shashank. I think supporting NGOs on core cost and capacity building and organization development has been part of ITILGIV's work since inception all these years. And Grow Fund, I would say, is a natural culmination or extension of what ITILGIV has been practicing since its inception in 2008. And we are glad to have many like-minded funders joining us to support in this one of its kind initiative. On the, do NGOs understand core cost well? I think from our Grow experience, I can say that NGOs need to definitely work on identifying what are core costs for them. Some of the points which, Nikita also touched upon earlier, I think it will change from organization to organization, at least on some aspects, but there are things like, say office costs, rent, salary of core cost, insurance, AMC, technology platform subscriptions, core cost travel, fundraising costs. I think these are some of the elements which will be applicable to all the organizations. In my experience, NGOs are able to build the program budgets very, very well. But when it comes to looking at the additional cost, or what you had shown in the earlier slide as shared cost, they fail to consider them appropriately under the core cost. Also, I would say that there is need for NGOs to think that beyond the number of 5%, 7%. I really don't know what is the genesis of this number, but in our Grow experience, we have seen that when we were running the webinars after announcing the program, we often were faced the question as first question after the webinar is over, that are you sure is Grow Fund going to support these costs? This is not a program funding. Are you sure on that? I think organizations also need to move beyond that. If there is a change that has to happen on the other side, that is the side of funders to ensure that they get support for these costs. Yes, definitely there is need for NGOs to really understand what are the core costs for them, and also engage into dialogue with the funders, help them understand how these costs are important to us. Otherwise, the barriers that funders face, it is not possible unless and until NGOs are able to engage into that dialogue and build that trust, clarity, and conviction with the funder that why they require those costs and how they are going to be able to perform and deliver better in terms of the program optimization of impact. I think those elements are definitely required. I would also place here trust as an important element here, because that is how you will engage into dialogue. Often funders also see there are some paddings to budgets, which also creates little bit of factor of trust there, which in a sense, when the organizations, and I mean from the NGO side, if such costs are not being supported, the NGOs will also look for opportunities from where those costs can be met. So there is, I mean, I wouldn't, no offenses to anybody, but this is also, sometimes we see. But it is for more effective delivery, it is important that, funders also look beyond 1 year of program and applying the same principles as we see in case of any enterprise, to say, okay, what are the strong, resilient organizations are going to be more effective in delivering optimum impact from program investments that we make. I think thinking creatively is also going to be important here. Helping, one example that you mentioned, where more than 10-15% of time spent should actually be direct cost, which helps you reduce and fit between that element of 10-15%, if at all the funder side does touch upon that.
Thanks, Atul. And I'll go to Rahul. Rahul, you have a unique position in the sector. You work with NGOs, you work with funders, and you work across different kind of engagements. So are there, like, what has been your experience in terms of the maturity of NGOs and like Atul said, they spend more time looking at the program costs, but not as much time spent on understanding the core costs and be communicating that, and any other challenges that you're seeing from the funder side as well, like Nikita talked about policies.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different factors that influence an organization's core costs. One is the type of organization, from implementation organizations to knowledge-led organizations, advocacy-focused, and more. Even within implementation models, from on-ground work, heavy, deep on-ground work, to say leveraging technology as a lever for scale, even working within government systems, all of this influence core costs. That level of institutional maturity that you mentioned as well, some less mature institutions might have less back office or support functions versus others with more robust central offices and full-fledged teams. And then, of course, programmatic scale. There's always going to be some level of economies of scale when these programs are scaled up. Central costs won't necessarily scale at the same rate. And these fixed central costs are then kind of spread out over further variable costs. And at the same time, replication as opposed to scaling is really another type of model that will help increase reach and impact. This also influences the core costs. And these are all just largely functions of an organizational model. The challenges really lie in being able to understand, calculate, articulate, and even position these core costs in a way that will help mobilize funding to help enable greater impact.
So I think this is very interesting to hear about the challenges that each of the stakeholders face from the other side. I just wanted to also explore what is the implication. So Nikita, I just wanted to bring you in again. So what are the implications if you have insufficient core cost coverage? What happens to you as an organization? And like as Atul was saying, communicate. So communication can be one in a positive sense. The other is, if a funder is not giving you core costs, what happens to the organization?
Yeah, so fortunately for us, we've been able to have some reserve funds, and like Atul said, we started with LED Foundation, that they were the ones who, first supported the rents and everything, which otherwise nobody else was ready to support. And since then, we've had this practice of also keeping some reserves besides the corpus. And also what we did is that with some of the big donors, like, we have some big donors who we have pitched for gap funding. Because of the way, so many years of engagement with them, we were in a position to tell them that we have money for direct costs, but now what we need is some, wherever there is a gap. So if there are 95 schools and otherwise the admin cost is around 8 to 10%, 6% is what we are being able to cover from the current donors who are actually supporting the 95 schools. What is not coming, which is not covered, can you please take on? And they have said yes, because of the credibility that we've been able to bring because of the several years of experience that we've been able to do so far. So that is one of the ways by which we do. Second thing, what we do, and the practice that we follow is we go back to the donors and so at least twice in a year, and we negotiate the terms and conditions in the beginning, saying that we will have a JCM, we will come in for reallocations. At least minimum give us a chance to do this twice a year, so that if there is saving in some budget line items, and we have mentioned the line item in the core cost, which is supposing rent or furnitures and fixtures, and we feel that during the year we have gaps and we've not been able to cover it even with the gap funding, then can we reallocate the money here? And if it is a part of the contingency, so many donors don't give contingencies nowadays. That also is a big this. But the ones who have agreed on contingency, they would allocate once they are okay with it. They would just kind of give us a go ahead, and we then allocate that amount. But it is a kind of struggle, I would say, with us, because of so many years of having run the same program, the night school program. We have been able to build a very good rapport with the donor. So we have been able to do this. But for a new NGO, or the NGO who is just kind of coming to and would want to work around these things, I think it would be a very quickly, I just want to touch base upon, I know it's not a question, but I would like to know if this initiative can be done where we could have, for us, we struggle with budget making. So if there can be a common understanding amongst the NGOs as well as donors on what are the norms around the core cost, what are the norms around organization development, how do you allocate? So is it 50% admin year and 50% in program core? So here are certain norms which are so right now, like for me, the language is different. What I understand is different from some other NGO, and that's why there are multiple, budget heads and buckets and so many. So I think a standardization of that and common understanding and acceptance will probably help in kind of we all agreeing that so much is something which all NGOs at this budget. So we could have say 20 crore budget ke liye itna admin be acceptable by all donors.
I will touch upon this later. But just to summarize the challenges, what I'm hearing quintessentially is if indirect cost or core cost is insufficiently covered, you actually end up using more valuable resources. Those more valuable resources could be in terms of unrestricted, flexible funding that you could have obtained from partner funders who you have rapport with, or it could be the time that your team ends up spending to fix that gap that has been created. And the other thing that you also mentioned as a challenge is the inflexibility even between the cost heads and the degree of effort it may be required to get those reallocations done with funders can again take a lot more time of the NGO leaders and like senior management, because these conversations are typically done by those.
Yes.
Atul, coming to the other side, what is the positive and why should funders be looking at covering core cost for their partner NGOs? What are the benefits that one sees if one is doing this?
I think, Shashank, the most important, benefit of covering the core cost for organization is a strong social development sector. No, why would we say that a strong organization is required to deliver in the business side only? It's true. It's NGO is an organization which is in business of doing some social good, right? So there also a strong organization is going to deliver strong optimum impact. So it is not only important for funders to see that whatever grant or programmatic investments that they make with an organization is delivering optimum impact. It is also equally important to say that what is it required to enable the organization to deliver that optimum impact is I think is equally important as a program part. As we saw from the research that you presented earlier, the pandemic has really caused havoc for NGOs, especially the smaller ones. I'm sure there are many organizations who faced existential crisis and also have probably closed down during the pandemic. The most important part here is sustaining and building resilience of this organization. Supporting core cost is going to help organization to sustain. Supporting core cost is going to help organization to build the resilience through strengthen governance, strengthening internal functions within the organizations, be it governance, be it financial management, M&E, program delivery. Eventually, it will all lead to not only a resilient organization, but also lead to higher program impact on ground. I think it's extremely critical to support.
Thanks, Atul. So I think at this juncture, I'll just open this to become a dialogue between the panelists. So in case either of the panelists wants anyone to answer a specific question. So.
Sure. Yeah. And even just quickly adding on to Atul's points, in terms of the implications, it's like the major thing about funding these core costs is really that delta difference for an organization over time. It's almost like compound interest. When one organization is making investments in their institutional capabilities, they can go from 1 to 10 and then 10 to 100. And the difference in their ability to enable impact can be significantly different from an organization who is unfortunately unable to do so. Like I've seen this, for example, when it comes to fundraising, where early investments in fundraising enables an organization to really build that fundraising engine versus one who keeps, the fundraising team very lean, unable to do the same and so forth. It's just another point I wanted to share there.
Sure. Thanks. Go on.
Yeah, and I guess I have a question also for you, Atul. How can evolved funders like Eat'll and Grow Fund really address these kind of challenges? And more importantly, what is some of your advice to funders that are earlier on in their journey of funding core costs?
I think I would say there is need to engage in dialogue with the NGOs to understand the challenges. There is while sometimes there are there could be some policies that the organization follows, but it really requires to understand what are the challenges on the side of NGOs to move beyond those. It's with funders to understand the challenges and really support organizations to build a stronger NGO, build a stronger social development organization to optimize the impact on that front. I think Grow experience is something like I mentioned earlier is very telltale for us, where organizations often ask us, is it really an initiative which is going to help support us on the core costs? I think that, and we have multiple partners who have joined us in this endeavor. I think that's one beginning. I would say it's going to be a learning experience for the sector, and that's how we also look at it, that the experience from here will also be helpful for other starting organization, the funding organization, to open up more for building the grassroots organizations further.
Sure.
I think I would also like to really understand from Nikita here that funders primarily cite, though we are one of the funders, but I would keep myself out from that, given what you said in the beginning, that as prioritizing program cost over core cost, and many times limited funding resources available as one of the reasons. So keeping in mind this, how can NGOs better articulate their needs to core funding support? I think you touched upon the communication part of it, but if you could help, cite some more examples here, it will be more helpful.
So basically, I think it is about, what we go about doing is that the larger picture first, and then coming to the, so larger picture, when I say that so in case of Masoon, it is the vision that we have. And so if we have to achieve this in the next 5 years, and generally we have a 5 years plan. So if you have to achieve this is a section of it. So say we are pitching for 20 schools, and we are saying that we are at this. And the larger picture is, if we, in the next 5 years, if we have to move to say 120 schools, the core costs are going to be like this. And so currently it is here. If you fund, then we will be able to move, because generally donors want to see the larger systemic change, and they want to see that, okay, this is what part we are doing, but ultimately where is the big change that we would like to see. And I think that's where if we are able to communicate properly, how this 20 schools, funding this 20 schools along with the core, all the core costs, and I think the communication, yes, we've had to negotiate, not that we've been able to, because some donors are completely fixated. They would say that no, we can't do anything, but some donors do accept and say, okay, we will maybe go back and review or something and then come back. But it's very important to show the larger picture, that how in the long term it is really going to make a difference to the, so in our case, it is this, so many out of school students we will be reaching out to. And so right now, if it is this, then the core cost is whatever, 8%, 9%, then this is how it is going to help build the organization to be able to scale up. Another component is the advocacy part, where we also along with that, the visibility that they would get in wherever we are submitting some research reports to the government, etc. That's where donors come in and say that, okay, if that is the case, then we are ready to look at some of the OD items, or even for that matter, core costs. So it's very it's right now very different with different donors, but our experience has been that if you go, so for instance, now what we have done, and this we've started only a couple of years back before pandemic, that the rent, because we do a lot of teacher trainings in the office itself, almost 30% of the space. So we say we have about 2,000 square feet. 30% is used for headmaster trainings, it is used for teacher trainings, it is used for advisory, it's used for counseling of the students, skilling program. So now we've kind of allocated that. And there is the time where you have to communicate properly and scientifically that how that 30%, which is the space, how it is used throughout the year. And there are donors who sit through and understand before they say no to the rent, this, and if they if we are able to convince them, then we have cracked it. Because and we are very transparent. We share with them when these meetings are held throughout the year. So it's given in a Gantt chart that these are the meetings that happen in the office. These are the, and I think that's where it is. But sometimes it's very difficult because talent, that's where money for the salaries of some people who are working on all these budgets also come in. Now we couldn't afford a CFO because of the pandemic. We had to divert all our money that we had for the CFO into putting into the program, because program person was the thing, and we diverted there. But sometimes the people, if they're not able to do that, and every time if so you need a proper you need talented people in place to be able to communicate the same that the CEO or the management has, and that's very critical, passing it on to the people who are the second line. And if you don't have the second line, all the more it is this. So yeah, there are multiple things.
Just like any question you have for any of the panelists, and then I wanted to open it up for the audience questions.
I already mentioned about the ideal budget making thing, which can be spearheaded by some of the funding organizations.
Sure. So I think, Rahul, I have a question from the audience for you. The question is, NGOs now have to closely monitor the program impact, and monitoring and evaluation is a line item. Should it be considered a program cost or a core cost?
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to be able to incorporate that into programmatic costs. And, even now with the recent law, the CSR law, this is actually becoming a mandate for corporates to actually do this kind of impact assessment, third-party assessment on their portfolios as well. And ultimately, the impact assessments are, the purpose is to improve the work that's being done is impactful, and also to improve the work as well. All of these kind of impact assessment studies, really enable this process to kind of reflect, learn, and strengthen the work on the ground as well.
So your suggestion is that as far as possible, it should be considered a programmatic cost and communicated in that manner. Nikita, one question for you is FCRA. I like whenever we talk about cost, FCRA does come up. So FCRA rules have defined certain cost heads to be excluded from program. So in fact, some of the rules, the thumb rules that we were sharing, FCRA excludes some of them, including, for example, rent. So how do you manage FCRA expenses for core cost and program cost when it comes, because it comes to with its own set of limitations now?
Yes, yes, definitely. So it's again the 20% of the total utilization and all that. So it has become slightly more difficult for us because that flexibility. So we have to maintain two different this, and there are compliances with FCRA account, and it is tough. So we have to be very strict because about we all know about how the FCRA rules are. So it has to be very strictly followed. So we do face, and because of that we have faced a lot of especially after the pandemic and even during, because to maintain the office space for us became very difficult. If not for the gap funding that we had, and then when the Grow Fund came, we could manage some, but otherwise, yes, it is tough. It has become tougher now with those regulations.
Sorry, I'm just going through some of the questions. So, Atul, one of the questions is what percentage should be allocated towards fundraising, and what all should constitute these costs when we talk about fundraising function? And Atul, Rahul, or whoever wants to come in help, like, do we have any kind of benchmarks on what percentage of an NGO's budget should be fundraising, and what all kind of expenses come under this?
I think I don't think there can be a fixed percentage towards fundraising. It would vary with the stage of organization that it is in, and overall a percentage is, if you look at it from the point of view of organization's annual budget, because that becomes the denominator, the same amount spent over for same organizations of different sizes, the percentage amount would change. So I don't think there is a specific benchmark, but I think it should take into account all the activities that the organization needs to do as part of the fundraising, and there could be different approaches of doing it. Someone may choose one-to-one, some may choose to have activities, events as part of their fundraising strategy. So I think there is no one-size-fits-all kind of an approach here.
And to add on also, I don't think there's any like clear-cut benchmark, but sometimes it's in order to grow the pie, you need to kind of invest, for sure. And I think it's always going to be important for organizations to monitor and optimize on their fundraising costs and so forth. But sometimes some of those investments, will yield returns, whether it's today or maybe next year, the year after that. And some of this will kind of, influence what that percentage actually is year on year.
Thanks. Thanks, both of you. There's an interesting question, and Atul, I think this may be best answered by you or Rahul. Funding in the impact ecosystem is moving towards outcome-based funding. So how do you look at measuring impact while supporting core cost in such situation? So I'll just tweak it and say, in an outcome-based funding scenario, how do funders look at core cost versus program cost, or do they even care about it?
I think impact measurements are important for from the organization point of view as well. As practice at Edelgive, we don't consider them as core costs. We consider them program costs.
Sure.
And we build for the same as part of our budgets, our program budgets with the NGOs itself, and not as a separate thing. That's what I would place here.
And to kind of add on, like if we are truly saying outcome-based funding, then it actually shouldn't have anything to do with those inputs. If we're truly kind of using that phrase outcome outcome-based funding, and as it's literally kind of stated, then it really is about the outcomes and impact.
So I saw a lot of discussion about CSR and the challenges with CSR. And I just wanted to share an anecdote that a CSR funder shared with us during our research. So basically, and it just emphasizes the need for the kind of communication that Rahul, you, Nikita, and Atul have talked about. The point that was made was there is the CSR team and there's the finance team. The finance team is very very sparsely involved in the proposal discussions. They're probably not spending as much time looking at the impact. They just look at the budget and their mandate is to cut costs, to make it more efficient as they look at it. So the CSR team was talking about the fact that if the same communication of why a particular cost head is high, why is it needed, how does it impact the program's success, that is shared with us, we are able to convince our finance team in our internal discussions, and we are able to make them move these policies as well. So I think that's one thing that we have seen with CSR, that a number of CSR are now trying to hire people who have development sector experience. And those people understand these challenges, but they are also constrained by the organization structure. So we need to also enable the funders for their internal communication. And again, there was this question of, is it NGO's responsibility to educate funders? My simple answer would be, who suffers if this education doesn't happen? Who suffers the most? And if it is us who's suffering, if it's the NGO who's suffering, we need to take that extra effort in a particular year so that over multiple years, that effort can yield fruits. And I understand it's a chicken and egg story. Nikita talked about leadership gaps and the challenges that we see in terms of resources at senior management level who can have these kind of communications. But at the same time, it is a vital communication to have with your funders, especially if these funders contribute a lot in terms of your budget. And sorry, I just wanted to check if there's another. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, Gaurav here. Just wanted to add a couple of points, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please go on.
Thanks. So, Shashank, I'll start with the last point that you just raised. Need kiski hai? And the fact that we have articulated that it is the NGO's need, actually, in my mind, and maybe I'm being very naive and overly idealistic, but it kind of reflects the existing power dynamic in the sector. And that is the power dynamic because of which the issues that we're talking about continue to exist. So need kiski hai, if we kind of articulate in terms of saying, hey, this is ultimately the people who lose, not the NGOs, but the people we are working for, right? And the ultimate loss is for society at large in terms of the impact that we are able to create or not able to create. And therefore, that kind of a slightly more balanced thought process or articulation might lead to a more balanced approach in power and power dynamics to get people onto a table to have conversations. So that's point number one. Point number two is, why are we even having this conversation, right? Somebody wrote, I saw on chat, is nobody's asking the corporate sector on office costs and this, for whatever they are doing. Actually, that's not true. I think the corporate sector is equally responsible to their investors for profitability, and SG&A is a big part of that profitability story. So they are continuously pushed to actually cut down on that. So the conversation that as versus cost, which is directly related to the work on the ground, the supporting cost, which is what we're calling core cost, must be a certain percentage or must be a certain ballpark. I think that conversation is valid. the question to ask is the nature of the conversation we end up having. Where is that coming from? So part of the story in my own head is this general, stereotypical belief that people working in the sector should not be paid, and if at all you're paid, it should be very, very minimal salary. So that's one place from where this general concept of having conversations on admin cost or co-cost start. Second, the idea is really what value are you adding? Because ultimately, I want to contribute towards what goes to the community at large. And so I want to reduce as much of the word used is leakage, as much leakage as possible in this entire space so that maximum goes to the community. So again, the question of the value we are adding, these are all points in of education that really need to come about. So I would love to hear from Rahul, Atul, Nikita, even you, Shashank, is what can we as a group do to bring multiple stakeholders onto the table to engage in further dialogue and education, is to try and understand more deeply this idea of core cost and try and come up with norms. And what you've said is there can be no one norm, but some norms which are more reasonable and which are based on a deeper respect of the role that the sector plays and a deeper respect for the work that is happening.
Yeah. Thanks, Gaurav. And please, if any of the panelists wants to respond, but completely agree with what you are saying, Gaurav, and just to thanks for nuancing it, because I was saying who's suffering more, and the implicit assumption was because the non-profits are closer to the community, they suffer more because of that. And thanks for nuancing that it needs to be set in the context of the impact or the community we aspire to serve as funders or as NGOs. And also in terms of this thing about, I think cost control is much more harsher in for-profits than it is in non-profits. I think startups is a different ecosystem, but wherever you look at corporate governance and public listed companies, every cost head is looked under, seen through a microscope, and every year everyone is trying to cut some costs. So that I completely agree. Coming to what you are saying in terms of what can be done, I think some things that we are doing as part of the Pay What It Takes initiative, I just wanted to bring in. One thing that we are working on this year is creating some kind of true cost guidelines. So again, the kind of things that Nikita talked about or you are saying, how should different cost heads be seen? It may not be one benchmark, it may not be one rule of thumb which everyone can adapt, but it should give some guidance in terms of how NGOs should be presenting their true cost and how should they be communicating. So exactly the impact orientation that Atul, Rahul, Nikita, and Gaurav, you have mentioned. How should these be set in the context of impact? The other thing that we are doing, and that's based on our previous year's research. So I saw in chat, there were questions about there are some CSR where the board members try to focus on reduction of cost. We identified funders, CSR is not a homogeneous segment. Similarly, domestic philanthropies is not a homogeneous segment. Foreign philanthropies are not homogeneous segments either. There are three archetypes that we have identified. There are some people who are program proponents. They may just be looking at what is my program achieving. There are some who are flexible based on relationships, so adaptive funders, who are willing to tweak their policies and rules based on how strong the relationship is. And there are some others who look at it from a long-term perspective and are organization builders. So it can almost be a journey for funders, and it's important for the sector to also support funders in the journey of evolution rather than just negating them and saying, oh, this funder is just giving us 7%. But if there's a communication and if more and more NGOs are having that conversation, then the funder can realize that there's something wrong happening on my side. What happens typically is the funder gives a cost rate and the NGOs make their budget accordingly. And that perpetuates that belief that this cost rate was fine. So next year, maybe I should try and reduce it further. So I think at least having that conversation that what you're giving to me is not good enough if we really want to achieve the impact. And then some battles an NGO will win, some will lose. But we need to keep trying is one thing that we have learned through the research. Coming to what can be done, I think, in my opinion, more such conversations and more sessions where maybe more funders can come, and if we can get funders who have these kind of restrictive policies, maybe in closed door coming together, sharing what their internal constraints are. Because this power dynamics that you talked about, it works the other way around as well. If I'm a funder, it's very, like, I need to be really self-confident and strong to share my vulnerabilities as an individual. Otherwise, I'm not meeting the expectation of how a funder should be. So there are very few funders who will open up in public forum and say, yes, I personally believe in this, but this is the constraint that I work. This can only happen in closed door conversations. So maybe I know it's not completely aligned to how the catalyzing change conversations happen, but there are certain nuances in these constraints which we can only get to with individual funders in closed doors. So maybe that's one request if that can be considered. Sorry.
We should definitely do that, Shashank. In fact, the catalyzing change conversation doesn't have one format.
Yeah.
It can have any format and whatever helps serve the purpose. So we should definitely take ahead these closed door conversations to get more and more people to nuance this idea of core cost.
Rahul, Atul, Nikita, any other thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think in my experiences, I think on both sides, the kind of capabilities, the education, need to kind of be increased. I think, going back to what Nikita had mentioned, I think, one of the biggest barriers to fundraising success that I've seen is really just that limited view of an organization's longer term strategy. This really gives clarity on where the organization is going, what capabilities they require, what are the investments they need to make, and other uses of funds that are really essential to the strategy. And, ideally, these strategies should, show how the per unit costs decrease with scale as well. And, on the funder side, just kind of one anecdote as well, we've worked with a few funders to actually, conduct these kind of organizational diagnostics on their portfolio organization to really kind of understand those core needs and investment areas and actually kind of create that financial model to project these financial needs. And these very mature funders that we've worked with actually look at this kind of 5-year grant period, front load investments into these core areas and taper them down over time, assuming that they'll be able to stand up, on 2 feet with this initial influx in capital. And I'd like to say that, Sattva as an organization has been able to enable this much more seamlessly and objectively and kind of bridge, some of these gaps on either side as well.
Sorry, I just wanted to request all the audience, there'll be a feedback poll that will come up on your screens. If you could please share so there's a link that has been shared on chat as well. If you could please share your feedback, it'll be really helpful for us to understand how this session was. Also, your feedback can help us figure out what direction should we take these conversations to actually achieve the impact that we all want to achieve. And to conclude, I would just want to say, I think what I have taken back is communication, sharing, transparency is a two-way street. I would like to add that funders need to take the first step to create that space for NGOs to share. But otherwise, unless there's more dialogue between the funders and the NGOs to understand each other's challenges and to alleviate those challenges. It'll be very difficult to really bridge this core cost gap. Once again, a request to please share your feedback. It's very important that we get your inputs. Sorry, Nikita, you wanted to share something?
No. I just wanted to very quickly say what I had mentioned earlier about this, standardization of ideal budget making, or norms around core costs, and so I just for organizations that have a bird's eye view where there are research like it could be Bitspan, it could be ISDM, Grow Fund, Satwa. If you all can come together and create these norms, which can be educated to both the donors and the NGOs as well, then we could have one, kind of a format which is circulated around the sector. I'm talking about the sector. So I don't know whether we can do something, because the platforms are missing. I think such where you standardize these norms.
There is some thought on that direction. In fact, we are trying to bring stakeholders together to, again, like last year, we worked on organization development toolkit with Satwa, Dasra, Toolbox, Dhwani Foundation, and Samhita as partners. This year, again, there's this aspiration to create a true cost model, like guidelines for the nonprofit sectors. So,
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I hope all of you have shared your feedback. In case you haven't, there will be an email that will get triggered. Please do share your feedback. Thanks a lot for making time for this session. We would love to stay engaged and continue the conversation. This is first in a series of conversations that we'll be hosting with Catalyst 2030. So look forward to more of these dialogues and together overcoming this challenge. Thanks ISDM and Catalyst 2030. Thanks, Indrani.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Shubham, you can stop the live streaming.
We can leave, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can. We are still being live streamed, so I'm not able to but I wanted to thank everyone. It was a very engaging conversation. There were so many questions that we still have. So Shashank, we know that we have another series coming up. Maybe this question can guide you to 2026.
It'll be good if you could also share the questions with us, and
I will.
try to get them answered offline as well.
That'll be great because we have streamed it on Facebook and YouTube. So if your team is able to respond to those questions there, it'll be great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
So run.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.